Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show Pat O'Brien. He is the training captain at the Taunton Fire Department. And if those of you have been paying attention recently, the Taunton Fire Department union became the fourth union in the country to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. Thanks to Proof of Workforce and Dom Bay for hitting the pavement out there and getting in touch, and for Pat reaching out to ask how to do this. So I really wanted to bring Pat on the show, a local Massachusetts guy as well, to talk about, Bitcoin for workers, Bitcoin for blue collar, what it's like adding Bitcoin to a union balance sheet, what this looks like, how firefighters and other workers are really ripe for Bitcoin education and understanding Bitcoin in the face of things like inflation and all of these different topics, and really just getting someone on that has just real life experience as a natural leader. I think you all are really going to love this episode. And I want to thank Pat for jumping on and getting outside of his bubble. He's starting to talk with more people, consult with more organizations that are looking to do similar things. And I am very, very bullish about unions and blue collar workers and workers in the US really understanding Bitcoin and seeing that their savings and their dollars aren't going as far as they used to. Well, Bitcoin could be a good retirement strategy and a good balance sheet strategy and all of these things. And a host of other use cases that we talk about in the show, of course, with human rights, the environment. It's good to add some American worker context into this. So thrilled to be able to present you all with this conversation. And we also have extended bonus content as we've been doing recently. So if you want to have access to the full interview, please subscribe, become a paid subscriber. It's super affordable for you all and goes a long way with our show. It's $6 a month, $60 for a year plan. There's also an option to pay with Bitcoin on Geyser. You can check all of that out in the show notes for how to become a paid subscriber. And as always, check out our partner links, SAS Mining, the best way to get sats and to mine Bitcoin 100%. We're using 100% renewable energy. You're going to get $50 off miners. And Bitbox is the best way to self-custody your Bitcoin private keys. You're going to get 5% off by going to bitbox.swiss/TPB and using TPB at checkout for 5%. All right, I'll let you all get to this conversation, and we will see you again next week. Hey, Pat, welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Trey. Good morning.
Really excited to have you on and excited to talk about one of my favorite things in Bitcoin, which is just adoption for normal, everyday people. We're going to talk, obviously, as people know about from the title and the description, talk about your fire department being the fourth union in the US to take Bitcoin into self-custody, to take Bitcoin on its balance sheet, which is very, very cool. And a topic and conversation I think a lot of people will resonate with. So I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast, and just want to have you give an intro to people before we jump in.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope I can resonate with some of the viewers. I hope my story is enthralling enough. But me, Pat O'Brien, firefighter for over 20 years in Taunton, Massachusetts. I'm also a paramedic and a nurse. I've done this for many, many years, done everything from ride ambulances to mental health work to emergency medicine. Right now, I'm currently captain of fire training. So my duties are to train approximately 128 to 130 guys in the firefighting skills, maintain those skills. So I'm quite busy with that. I'm also a small business owner in which I teach emergency medical response to private businesses. So I'm quite busy. Slowing down a little bit in my older age, but you continue to learn, continue to work. That's my background in terms of profession.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we're going to have a lot to talk about in the show. I know people are going to want to hear more about how it even got to be that Bitcoin is on the balance sheet of Taunton Fire Department, what people thought about that, how you talk to coworkers and colleagues about that. But I wanted to start too with your own journey into Bitcoin. Like, how did you get into Bitcoin? What was this like for you to go from, learning about Bitcoin to then incorporating it into your day-to-day work life, which a lot of people don't even go to that point, right? A lot of people are just like, it's an internal thing or it's a family thing, and they don't know how to even talk about it in a work setting or things like this. So you went full circle with this, it seems.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin. That's the amazing thing about Bitcoin is that there's no end to the rabbit hole. You just keep going down and down and down. And I think my opinion is that there's very few people that all of a sudden just go boom and they get Bitcoin and they go all in with 100% conviction. I think people grow in stages in understanding. And it begins with understanding or finding the problems with the financial system in your life, whatever culture you're in, whatever financial background you're in. I think that the understanding of Bitcoin comes in stages, and that was true for me. So way back in the day, I mean, I'll go back to my college days in Boston. I did have a small background in technology. And part of that is I used to subscribe to this magazine called 2600 Hacker Quarterly. So I might be dating myself in my old age with that, but some of your viewers may remember that quarterly magazine that came out. And I can remember around 2010, 11, and 12, they were talking about something called eCash, internet money. And Bitcoin was one of the paragraphs or modules of that article. It went in one ear, went out the other. I saw it, I read it, I processed it, and I just couldn't see how that would grow beyond the bubble of really, cypherpunks and real techie nerds. I didn't see how that could gain mass adoption. It was cool. I was into the tech. It reminded me of Napster. Again, I'm probably, dating myself with Napster, but it kind of reminded me of that, this decentralized value thing. But I didn't see how that could really challenge the fiat world and the financial system that I was a part of, that I was indoctrinated in. I was brought up that way. And that was the topic of conversation amongst college kids in my young professional career as well. We were all indoctrinated. And so I tried to outwork the system. My strategy was to just work harder, get another job, get a third job, and just keep getting dollars so I could buy ultimately useless things. That was my no thought of the future. That was just my thesis. Outwork everyone. Get a second job, get a third job, keep trading away hours to gain more dollars. And everything was going pretty good. I was making quote unquote good money now in the mid teens. So we're talking 2014, 15, 16. I'm working as a nurse and doing my firefighting thing. I met a wonderful woman, Brazilian woman. We got engaged to get married. And then probably one of the worst news is that anyone can hear is I was diagnosed with cancer in June 2016. I remember it clearly because it was right before we were going to get married. So those are two things I won't forget. The day you get diagnosed with cancer and the day that you marry someone you love. So that was a very special day, but also a very scary time. So the cancer that I had with my nursing and paramedic and fire background the odds were not in my favor to walk away from this one. So again, if any of your viewers have ever been faced with this situation with your mortality, your existence, it has a profound permanent impact on your way of thinking of the world and yourself. And the biggest question I came is, what is my legacy? My God, what am I going to leave for other people to remember me by? What am I physically going to leave behind for my new wife, my new bride? What's going to be lasting? What can she understand? What's going to give her the best possible financial stability if I don't make it out of this one? So I got to leave something besides money. Money, I had already started to learn that by this point was just debasing and losing its value. You shouldn't save it. So I was searching for other things and, gold. Okay. Real estate, not bad at all. Not bad at all. But I wanted more upside. I wanted something, boom, 10 years down the road. This is something special. This is something big, and I was still kind of thinking in the fiat terms, but so I did my research and I thought of Bitcoin or remembered Bitcoin, my other readings. And, I jumped in small at the beginning, but even while I was undergoing chemo, I did two things or a few things. I continued to work as a firefighter. I would take my treatments and go into work, but all my other spare time got diverted away from the other jobs. And then my second job really became about learning about Bitcoin. And slowly but surely, I started gaining conviction. Some of it had to do with the money appreciation, the price appreciation. Because you think about 2016 and 17, I think at the beginning it was somewhere around $1,000 and $900. And I went in very small and just took it at that very deliberate pace to learn more and more. My conviction level started rising. Then around 2017, 18, I started getting into some of the altcoins, the poop coins. And just like most people who truly understand what's going on in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular, you always circle back to Bitcoin because it really offers the best benefit, safety, privacy. It checks all the boxes. Those other coins I consider tech companies. You want to invest in tech companies, go ahead. You want to invest in sound money, take your dollars, put it into Bitcoin. That's the way I was thinking. I'm not advising anyone to do this. This is what I did. And it was for a specific purpose, to leave something years down the road for my wife, right? Again, I was looking for something long-term, lasting, more permanent. So, that's pretty much how I started changing into a Bitcoiner, if you want to say. I felt the inflation just like everyone else. I did the comparisons amongst assets, and it always brought me back to Bitcoin. And now 2024, it's now starting to bleed out from early adopters to regular people. And Taunton Fire Local 138 is just one example. Santa Monica, California Firefighters is another example. You have pension funds that are starting to get hit. And everyone knows the story out there that's listening to this, the ETFs. And for God's sakes, we got presidents and politicians talking about it now. So the time is right now that if you're an organization or a working person for wages, hourly wages, don't get left behind. Start education. Educate yourself on what money is and how you're really not given a fair break in that system. Whereas Bitcoin is more level playing field. So that was kind of my personal transition into Bitcoin. And now I would have to say that my conviction level is much higher than it was back in 16, 17, 18, and 19. If you can make it through those years, you can make it through any of the stuff happening now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, and I mean, I think you did a great job touching on the why of the timing. And even now, right? Like you said, you've got presidents talking about it. You have, the ETFs, you have more of this mainstream adoption that's been building since probably that 2018, but year after year after year, it keeps building and growing. I'd love to hear how because I think a lot of people think this constantly, is how you translate that personal conviction in Bitcoin to normies in your life, to family, or to in this instance firefighters, when in a lot of ways people still, there's political ideologies, there's different mainstream news and journalists still talking about, oh, what has bad environmental impacts, it's for criminals and terrorists, it's for this, it's for that, oh, Trump's talking about it, so I don't like Trump, so I don't like that. All of these different things that go into the narrative of Bitcoin, when you and I both know Bitcoin at the end of the day it's a lot of different things, a lot of different tools, but it's also open source code. It doesn't have a political identity. It doesn't require you to believe in any sort of XYZ to use it or hold it or benefit from it. So I'm wondering, how you related that to folks, to, fellow firefighters, and how you started those conversations. I think that's a good lesson for people to hear.
Yeah, it's a long story, but it develops in stages. I think of, like, first of all, I don't know who said it, but it was some Bitcoin thinker that said Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin doesn't care, what your political ideology is or what culture you're in or where you're from. Doesn't even care if you're poor or rich, but you should care about Bitcoin. So how did it really start off? I would say that I started getting excited. I started getting excited in that 2017, 18. There was a lot of price movement. I started learning more about it, and I started uncovering more about inflation and our banking system. And I didn't like it. I felt like my time, energy, and effort were just being wasted. And I was worried about my pension long term, because that's directly connected to the financial system. So I started talking to some guys. We call it tailboard talk. Tailboard talk in the fire services is that we literally talk at the back of the fire truck when it's parked in the station. And usually during shift change, that's where a lot of information gets exchanged. And so once we were done with our professional obligations of shift exchange, I started talking to some of the other officers about Bitcoin. and some other coins that were out there, but mostly Bitcoin. And they were real estate guys. So they kind of took to it pretty quickly. They had a lot of questions, and a lot of, drug dealer, criminal, tax evasion. They were very concerned about that. But after months of talking every day during shift change, they started. I heard the questions. Well, how do I get some? I want to watch this. I don't want to put a lot of money into it. I want to watch this. So they were very smart. They had more traditional intelligence than I did in terms of real estate. So I found it very easy. And it started in this one particular fire station. So I would say there was 4 or 5 of us that really jumped on board. They spread to other coins. I spread to other coins. I came back to Bitcoin. Some of them came back to Bitcoin. But at least the foundation was there. How do wallets work? How to look up the price on exchanges, how to make swaps. They started learning about these things. How to self-custody was a big milestone, that I achieved with talking to them. So now I look at Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption as like these bubbles of cultures. You could be a Teamster, you could be a firefighter, a police officer, you could be a nurse, you could be in academia, you could just be working a labor job. All these different little bubbles, different religions, different organizations. And until you're incentivized to look into Bitcoin a little bit more, until you're incentivized to make that leap into Bitcoin and see that what it can do for you, it's just going to be noise in the background, But at some point, everyone, I believe, is going to see the benefit and utility of Bitcoin, of the protocol, and all the things that Bitcoin can offer at the protocol level. And I don't think it's done evolving. So that 5 or 6 guys grew. And at one point, I started coming out of my shell. Just recently, about a year ago, I started attending more spaces, more exchanges and emails with people. For 8 years, I just watched and stacked sats. But now I start feeling more comfortable about this and reaching out because the timing just feels right to start, making more contacts. So I came across Don Bay in Proof of Workforce out of Santa Monica, California. And I just cold called him. And I said, hey, I'm a fellow firefighter here, Bitcoiner for a long time. We have a few groups of guys here. How does a union, a nonprofit 501c3, actually go about this? Because I can talk to another person, a family member, a friend about Bitcoin, but I'm ashamed to say I didn't really know a lot about unions and how they function with bylaws. So Dom and Proof of Workforce provided that framework because they'd done it before. There's 3 other unions out in California, including Humboldt and in Santa Monica, and they're very similar to us. So if they can do it, if they see the benefit of it, why not Taunton Fire here on the East Coast? There's an old saying about fire services is that it's 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And that's kind of like a stereotype that persists. We blame tradition. Well, if they can do it, if they can break from tradition and go into this area of Bitcoin, why can't Taunton Fire? So under Dom's guidance, under Proof of Workforce framework, we had governance now. I knew how to speak the language of convincing or educating the electoral board, the e-board of the unions, and get them on board. And that was the first step. We got the president behind this idea of hedging our treasury funds against the debasing dollar. That's all it was. It's not an investment. It's a converting of US dollars into Bitcoin to be used for whatever in the future. We don't know. I can't predict the future. So again, that framework, and because it was already done before by other unions, it happened fast. I went in front of the union. I gave a 1-slide PowerPoint labeled Solidarity and Education. And my whole focus was that, hey, don't think of this as an investment. This is not risky, blah, blah, blah. This is solidarity. This is a movement where we can all buy into something together as an organization. And it's also an opportunity to educate finances, because besides health and well-being of firefighters and being safe on the job, financial health and wellness is also very important because we got families, we got kids, we got wives and mortgages. So for you younger guys and you older guys out there that are about ready to retire, this is your opportunity to exercise solidarity and educate yourself about what's really going on with this financial system and the banks that we play with every day. You're not invited to that party, so let's look outside and truly diversify our holdings. To hold all this money in our union treasury doesn't make any sense. So why not convert it into Bitcoin? And what Dom really impressed upon me in Proof of Workforce did is it's not my Bitcoin, it's not Firefighter XYZ's Bitcoin, it's the union's Bitcoin now. What does that mean for the future? I have no idea, but I am highly confident that the brilliant minds in Bitcoin protocol and devs, they're going to take Bitcoin from what it is now to something I can't imagine 5, 10, 15 years from now. So why not get off of zero, hedge your bets against the US dollar, park some money into Bitcoin, and let's figure this out together and learn more about it. And maybe something really wonderful will happen in 5 to 10 to 15 years. I don't know. So that's the whole idea. Not selling anything, not making any commissions off of anything, but me talking to a person to try to educate them on Bitcoin, easy. Trying to convince your organization, a democratic organization, to vote on it, it took some help. And I do want to thank Dom and Proof of Workforce for that, because the framework was there, the playbook was there. I learned a lot about how unions operate and nonprofits. So I can see how other organizations in the near future are going to start being incentivized to follow along. I just see it spreading now. The time is right now. I now see why adoption will take place, as opposed to me first reading about it back in 2011.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying a lot is because you're talking about working wages, you're talking about a job that people are really, really passionate about, like service, duty, these things with firefighters and other types of unions, right? And conveying to people, listen, we've all seen the inflation the past few years. We all see kind of the road ahead. People are starting to see and hear more and more about this like national debt, this national deficit. They're seeing their bills go up. They're seeing, their wages not rising with that inflation, all of these other things. And so it is very compelling out of all of the use cases of Bitcoin, which there are many, many, many. We talk about human rights on this show. We talk about Bitcoin miners and renewable energy. Gosh, there's so many other cool things that Bitcoin will continue doing. But at a basic level, for someone in the US to understand, which let's be honest here, in the US, in a very privileged position, a lot of people might be some of the last to get it because we don't need it as much. Some of these qualities. But for a firefighter to see, or a union to say, let's just put some of our treasury into this because our dollars are melting anyway, right? That seems like one of the most conservative approaches. And then from there, just being hooked in, it seems like a no-brainer in some regards, but it is still a big hurdle, I think, for some people.
That's absolutely right. Well said. Yeah, the idea was, and this was told to me by Dom, is that you go in at enough so that it doesn't elicit an emotional response, but it puts you in a learning frame of mind, an educational frame of mind. And that's my quote unquote hope for our union. And that maybe on the East Coast, other local unions around us see this happening and they say, hey, why not? Why not try this? Because I don't see a lot to lose in this, you talk to a TradFi guy and, they come in around the fire offices, stations all the time and try to convince us to invest in this mutual fund or buy this whole term life insurance. And they always say this word diversify. Well, you're diversifying in a phone booth. That's the way I look at it. They're all interconnected. But the Bitcoin protocol, it truly is in the periphery. And that if you believe in diversification, this is diversification, And in terms of wage workers, on the fire services, now I'll just speak from the fire union perspective. We typically sign 3-year contracts and we have to negotiate for raises over a 3-year period. And the cities typically, because it's a negotiation process, they want something for it. And then what we look at the end is, all right, a 2% raise, maybe 5% total over 3 years. And so a lot of people out there may not, granted it's taxpayer money and taxpayers should get a good deal. They're paying taxes. They should get a professional service. But 5% raise in any job over 3 years just keeps your nose maybe level with the water level. So I know there's a lot of people out there that would kill for 5% raise over 3 years. Doesn't mean that, we shouldn't try to fight for that. You should fight for that. Or you should take some of your money and freeze it in Bitcoin. Um, Everyone's in this struggle. All workers are. All workers are in the struggle because that's the system. The only ones who I see really benefiting from the inflationary environment we're in is the people who are already ultra wealthy and they have the means of production. If you're a wage worker, you're on a hamster wheel and you're just hoping to get 5% over 3 years, 2% a year. I don't applaud that. I don't get up all happy about that. I'm just looking at it as my nose is still at the water level.
Yeah, I think more people are starting to wake up to that. And listen, we're both Massachusetts guys on this call. We're in one of the most expensive places in the country. I mean, I can't imagine. Well, I'll ask, in terms of, I've done, especially a lot of nonprofit work in workforce development, and I used to always look at data around hiring trends and what industries are growing, which are, all of these different kind of data and numbers of, whether it's inflation and wages and jobs. What is it like for younger guys coming into fire departments these days? Is it, I mean, what are those kind of resources that are there in terms of, you're talking about some of these wage growth? Is it something that the industry's been doing okay recruiting firefighters? Do you think that because it may very well, you might say, actually, it's kind of, we're doing okay with that, but still can struggle in terms of these wages. But what is that like for these guys coming in? And then you mentioned 5% over 3 years. That's tough in a place like Massachusetts, with just skyrocketing costs across the board, especially in housing. Especially I can imagine the younger guys who don't have a house yet and are trying to look into that. It's a tough climate to try to figure out what to do with your career and these wages.
Yeah, I don't think there's one answer that I can fit that and generalize the whole thing. Like some guys I've noticed that come on the job, they may take actually a pay cut. They're tradesmen that are coming in that look to, because they perceive the fire services as more stable in terms of a pension. That's what they're told. You're going to get good benefits, and right, yeah, your health insurance is greatly subsidized by the city. Yeah, those are great reasons to do it. And they got young families, but they get an ultimate pay cut. Now, some other guys may be getting out of the service, or after they've gotten out of the service, are working, a security job somewhere, and the money is not good enough for them to buy their first condo or their house. So it's a pay raise for them. And the thing about the fire services, depending on what, department you work for, sometimes the schedule will enable you to trade in more hours later on. You work 48 hours at a minimum, right? At a minimum, you're working 48 hours a week. But the way it's clustered around your time, you may be able to get another job to make ends meet. So if you took that pay cut, maybe you can continue to work on the side with a part-time job, dual streams of income. That's the reality. That's what you got to do now, because some guys can make a lot of money working overtime, but now you're working 90 hours a week. You see? So the younger guys coming on the job, I don't think they really understand the financial system. They see a number on a page that gets deposited, and that's good enough for them when they're young. They're chasing after getting a down payment for a house. But eventually, as you get older, they're going to do the same things that I did after 20 years. You're going to start feeling the pinch of rent or mortgage or car payment, and you're going to go out and get another job. And that's going to buy you some time. And then you're going to go out and get another job. You're going to get a third job. Pretty soon you run out of hours in a week. But you got to cut back on what you're spending on, right? Now, the pension is another thing. Everyone has all this faith in the pension that's going to be a savior. I've seen enough in 20 years to realize that nothing is guaranteed. So if you want to work till you're 65 to get a pension and live a couple more decades, you're rolling the dice. If you want to retire earlier, you're definitely rolling the dice. So I think education of the young guys, that's a big problem. I'll teach, well, not me, but the fire services will teach you to be safe at a fire. We'll teach you the medical skills to do your job. There is no thought into mental health. There is no teaching of mental health. There's no teaching of financial health. And man, are we missing a big opportunity to do that? And I supplement my teaching with this. I mean, you come into the kitchen at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're going to see you by the coffee maker talking about this or, Bitcoin, basically. So yeah,
Mm.
I worry not so much about the younger guys coming on, being safe on the job and getting the skills that they need to perform this job. Fire services will go on. But I am worried about being excluded from what's really going on here in the financial world. I need more education for these guys to think long term and don't overly rely on their pension, i.e., now we come back to Bitcoin again. It all goes back to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about not in a I'm not a big believer in talking of these doomsday situations and things like this, but it's a way of slowly preparing folks. We talk a lot in Bitcoin about like opting out and building parallel systems, right? Because the cracks in the current system continue to show more and more and more. It's not always guaranteed. Like when you're talking about pensions, every state's pension looks dramatically different. Some are pretty well funded right now, some are drastically underfunded. But regardless, there's been a drastic loss of trust in these systems year after year after year, whether it's media, whether it's government, whether it's state, federal government, especially federal government. And after a while, a lot of states are consistently looking to the feds to bail them out in certain situations, emergency funding, emergency congressional approval. There is no debt ceiling, so that's continuing to go up. At some point, you're playing musical chairs and the music stops, right? And I don't predict, and I could be very, very, very wrong about this. I don't predict some sort of catastrophe in my lifetime, the sense that'll send us into this doomsday, escape like TV show or series, right? But the least that folks can do is start to learn about some of these things, learn about these safety nets, right? Especially the ETFs are here. Businesses are starting to say, hey, we're just losing and burning money. We're going to start adding this asset. More family wealth offices are taking it. More people are buying these ETFs as retirement strategies, all of this, because that future, like you were saying with these pensions, it's not a guarantee going forward, right? We're used to a lot of systems being able to bail out or money printing or all these other things for different situations, right? And not every pension is the same. I'll continue to echo that, right? It's not, you've got to look at individual situations, but it's getting harder and harder for people to not look at other situations, to not say, okay, this feels like something's not right here, or my bills are going up, or what about my pension in this? And people are starting to naturally turn to something like Bitcoin that is an alternative, right? To this broken system. If the system wasn't broken or was working just fine, would we need Bitcoin? Definitely not as much. So a lot of people are starting to naturally turn to this. So just back to your point on like the timing is right. It really is. The good news, bad news is the timing is right because these cracks are starting to get bigger. And luckily Bitcoin exists. That's what I would say.
Yeah. And what an opportunity. You're right. The cracks are getting bigger. They're becoming more obvious to people. I mean, you really have to have your head in the sand. So what I see an opportunity here is that Bitcoin can actually be like that Venn diagram, progressive, left leaning, ultra conservative, or whatever other bubble you want to do. When you come together, there's that shared middle ground. And I think that Venn diagram, that's Bitcoin. You could label that Bitcoin in the middle because there is something for everyone there. Just in our union, just to circle back to the union, I mean, one of the ways that I presented it to the people is like, hey, this is a reserve of funds. We have money just sitting in this account, and I want you young guys to realize that that's not really a sign of wealth like that number. It's just a number. It's just a number. And they can add a comma to it at any time. And that's a small number now, right? So store of value long term. Hey, this is money that we put into a kitty, into a pot, but that's your time and energy. So why don't you store that time and energy right now for a later date? Who knows what's going to happen, right? Less reliant on banks. And you kind of touched on it there. Like people are asking questions and you go on Twitter, you go on the news. It's so polarizing now. A lot of conspiracies out there, a lot of doom and gloom. Hey, just start asking questions. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but just start asking questions. So let's be less reliant on it. And it's liquid. At any given time, you don't like it. It's too hot in the kitchen. Get out. Convert your Bitcoin back to cash if you want, right? I think the last thing is really fire. This is made for firefighters in a way because firefighters are like great risk managers, and I'll put them up there with corporate guys who have been being paid to be risk analysis people, risk mitigators. I mean, you're talking about firefighting. That's what firefighting is. Even the new recruit to the old salty guy at the end of his career has been trained to think in a certain way. We analyze the risk, we mitigate the risk with training, i.e. education and experience, right? We mitigate that risk and we weigh the risk versus the reward. So what's the risk in the dollar? You own the dollar, you'll just get a slow bleed over decades. Very low volatility, but hey, it's very predictable. That's safe for some people. But if you look at the reward of it, the rewards far outweigh the risks in Bitcoin. Now, that's right up a firefighter's alley. You just thought risk reward. What can I gain? Can I save a life? Well, I'm willing to take a risk, right? And I think that helped me very much educate some of the guys on the fire department. I put it into that context, just using firefighting terms to explain as a metaphor for what's going on. Now, I can see nurses doing the same thing. I can see iron workers doing the same thing. I can see electricians doing the same thing, teachers union doing the same thing, church groups doing the same thing, on and on and on. And I'm starting to hear more about it now than in the past. And that's why I feel the time is just right now to start your journey or education to it. What is your incentive in your particular world, in your particular bubble, no matter what that is? Because you will find the intersection in Bitcoin. It has the potential to be a joining force instead of all this polarization going on. And you're starting to hear it a little bit out of the president's mouth. I never thought I'd hear two candidates mention Bitcoin. I didn't believe that would happen.
Hi everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Yeah, I think what I like about it, and what I try to articulate a lot, and what I'm most bullish about, is kind of this true grassroots campaign of Bitcoin, right? It's not that someone from the top down is telling you need to do Bitcoin. It's people are looking for answers and solutions because people are resilient, especially working class people. Like, I grew up in an area of Southern Virginia where that was the day and day, as people just trying to figure out how to afford their bills, how to pay their mortgage, how to do this. But resilient people figuring things out is how they come to Bitcoin, right? How a lot of people, I think, are starting to come to Bitcoin in these real practical ways, whether it's unions, all of these. So I'm very bullish on one of the bigger waves of adoption in this country being from wage workers, being from unions, being from groups that are like, listen, these politicians XYZ always talking about how they're going to raise this wage, or they're going to bring these prices down, or this and that. And again, people are just starting to learn about money and all of these other things. A lot of people don't even know about that yet. But then they're saying, this Bitcoin thing, okay, after 10 years, okay, it did pretty well against the dollar. Just very baseline things, right? That's what I'm very bullish on. And it's less, we don't need in my opinion, we don't need a president to say you need to do this with Bitcoin. We don't need these things. People are learning and growing as it is. And I trust people and believe in people, especially people in the US, these working class people, to make those decisions for themselves. And they are. They are over time.
That incentivization will become more apparent. The United States might be a little bit behind. Like I said, my wife is Brazilian. I've been to Brazil many, many times. And I tell you what, they all have cell phones, and banks are tough to get to, and banks are kind of slow service-wise there. So there's not really like a physical a physical barrier to banks in Brazil, but there is a time constraint. You're leaving work and things move slow in banks. So, hey, you got it in your pocket right now. You got a bank in your pocket right now. And the adoption there, I don't have hard numbers, but just my observations is they kind of get it because they're incentivized to. They're incentivized more than Americans, but I think that time is coming right now. I think you're just starting to see the beginning of that, and the evidence is you have this old school organization called Local 138, Taunton, Mass. Fire Union voting 92% in favor of adopting Bitcoin. And now I'm starting to get a lot of questions from local unions right around us, geographically. So I see this anecdotal evidence of that spread. And when I talk to them, they may not know a lot about Bitcoin, but I'm actually taken aback by how much they know about value of the dollar debasement financial system, banking system, and how they're kind of getting a raw deal. These are words that I hear from really blue collar guys. So I'm kind of taken aback by it. And so I see the next step is that this is going to happen. The time is right now to do this. And I think Bitcoin is still in its childhood in terms of adoption.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful and bullish. We have to I think get through some more narrative stuff, which has been starting to break down more through the terrorism, the criminal, the environmental this, the environmental that, and getting back to a place where people and communities and fire unions and workplaces are talking more about always the number one issue with elections and politics is the economy. It's always the number one issue of what people are thinking about when they head into election. Can we get back to a place where people are less concerned about, well, is Bitcoin a left wing or right wing thing? Is Bitcoin for my group or not? Or is this, get back to more, what are some practical solutions for everyday people, regardless of your political ideologies? And I think Bitcoin, back to your point, can be a great unifier in that. Bitcoin is not and should not be this partisan tool. It should not be for this group or not that group. It is a tool available today for everyone. And I'm very, very hopeful and optimistic that as these other things start to crumble without solutions, right? A lot of lawmakers are saying certain things. They don't have solutions other than keep the train going. Well, that's not really an option. Like the chairman of the Federal Reserve has said that basically is not a long-term option. This is not a long-term solution. Our debt crisis, our monetary situation, all of these things will have an end date at some point, right? So having people get more prepared and better prepared with something like Bitcoin, I'm very hopeful and optimistic, and thank God that that tool exists as a unifier. But I think we're still trying to push through some of that partisan noise in the meantime to get to that point. And hopefully that point comes sooner rather than later. Maybe it's already here in a lot of regards, and the noise is just kind of peripheral noise, right? I always try to keep my ear in tune with what are normal people thinking about Bitcoin versus what is Bitcoin Twitter saying, or what are these politicians saying that are just the fringe extremes of groups, right? And I'm hopeful a lot of people in the middle will just say, "Oh yeah, Bitcoin's a thing I have. It's pretty great. It's helped me with this. It's helped me with that," and just see it as a useful tool, and then we go on from there. That's the real dream, and I think we're close to that point, like you're saying.
Yeah, so I think the politicians talking about it, Biden, Trump, anybody on the right and the left, they're incentivized to talk about it. They're incentivized to talk about it, to mention it, and they're going to try to steal the narrative a little bit, right? They're gonna try to use these words. I don't really care too much what they say. I really don't, because they can either speed it up, they can slow it down, but neither party, neither side, where you sit on the political spectrum, is going to stop this, because it's not political. It's financial. It's something different. So I view more about what they do. And so right now they're incentivized to talk about it and cast it in a good light, right? You see like Gary Gensler getting a little heat put on him, and I see some things going on in the background with these bills, the SAP 121 or the FIT 21s, right? I see some things happening in the background. They're incentivized to talk about it. I'm waiting for when they're incentivized to do something about it, incorporate the mining, and find a way to have a business environment in which these miners can maximize value for their stockholders, that we can use energy very efficiently and effectively, and maybe bring down the prices. I'm not an electrical or energy economist by any means, but I would think that if we can efficiently use energy, and from the miner's perspective, that's a bonus. That's a bonus. I think the politicians eventually will be incentivized to do something, start creating laws, start having regulations to a certain extent to make sure that these drug dealers and these terrorists cannot use this. I mean, I don't know if that's possible at the protocol level, but hey, at least the benefits will outweigh the negatives. That's my belief. So I'm waiting for the politicians to do something, instead of trying to polarize the issue and rip it apart, make it wedge issues within their own parties, because it's just lip service right now.
Yeah, I regularly, especially with normal folks, there's metaphors to be made with Bitcoin, and metaphors are imperfect examples, right? So when we can even say Bitcoin is a Swiss bank in your pocket, Bitcoin is digital gold, Bitcoin is digital cash. It is all of those things. It's also a lot more, and that's not a perfect example. But another thing I try to tell is, early on, people were very up in arms, and especially politicians, about the internet, about what the internet should be. There were lawsuits, there were cases. Bitcoin is going through a similar thing where it would be silly to say the internet is left wing or right wing. The internet is for terrorists or not. And it's like the reality is everyone uses it, including those criminals. And in my opinion, it's like police and investigations need to do better police work, not do lazy police work of punishing everyone who is using Bitcoin or using these tools or using the internet because of a very, very, very small few, less than the fiat system and the dollar system, by the way, very small few that would use Bitcoin for bad ends. Go after those bad folks. Do not try to go after this open permissionless protocol that millions around the world are currently using, that we're trying to prepare and hope that billions can be incorporated in at some point. So we're still in those last phases of growing pains of having that conversation in a very similar way that was had with the internet. And people wanted to control the internet and make it very permissioned. And those folks lost. And the internet is permissionless in terms of using it. And that's the same thing that Bitcoin is headed towards. And in my opinion, the cat's out of the bag. It means we need to continue fighting for these privacy enhancing tools, for all of these true benefits of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can't be stopped, but you as a citizen of a country can be. So that's the reality there. We got to keep up that fight. But the cat's out of the bag, and the people starting to see the benefits of Bitcoin.
It's too late to stop it. And I saw this happen in the 90s, like it was internet, intranet, now it's back to internet. And then it's kind of like this permutation between internet with like the Googles and the AWSs out there controlling most of the internet. But, what it was really supposed to be was in internet, wide open protocol for everyone to use. Now, yeah. So Bitcoin, I use Bitcoin for legal and lawful purposes. But if I was a bad guy and I jumped on the Bitcoin protocol and tried to use it for some, nefarious means, I'd probably get caught. So
yeah, that's the other reality of the the open ledger, the public
right.
ledger.
Yep.
Bad guys in a lot of ways stopped using Bitcoin because it's so open and traceable compared to dark money with the dollar, which is a funny example. I wanted to ask you though, because one thing I was thinking, being in Massachusetts, talking some inside baseball with you. I mean, a lot of Bitcoiners, pretty much all Bitcoiners, a lot of people know of Elizabeth Warren and how she is very, very, very against Bitcoin and crypto, and is very ready to spread misinformation at every turn and have people listen to her about that. And I want to hear your thoughts about the irony of someone like Elizabeth Warren, to a lesser degree Ed Markey, or two senators in Massachusetts when it comes to Taunton's local fire union, adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet, other unions doing this, other organizations in Massachusetts. When these politicians come for photo ops, I'm not saying just specifically in your case, but it's kind of like, oh, the irony, right? Like, how much longer can they battle this, or can they say Bitcoin is just for criminals? Bitcoin is this. We need to do, in Elizabeth Warren's case, wanting to literally do a backdoor ban on Bitcoin. So only basically bank-like organizations such as Coinbase, which, oh, the irony there, again, of Elizabeth Warren, can hold or use Bitcoin, and that people can't self-custody Bitcoin just in the way you would self-custody cash. So that's obviously ridiculous to propose. I also think it's unconstitutional. But I digress. What is the irony there of you all, like working class folks, firefighters, seeing the benefit of Bitcoin, and then your senator being so against Bitcoin? And, is there a timeline on this to where at the end of the day, she's just going to have to throw her hands up and be like, people in my own state, people that I would do photo ops with, unions, for Democrats, there's only so much they can do.
Yeah. So I think back to the old statement, I don't know where it originated from, but if the situation doesn't make sense, it's political. So her being against specific, I don't know Senator Warren personally. I never had a cup of tea with her. I never sat down with her. I never talked to her personally. I've probably been to a photo op with her. I'm trying to struggle to remember, but that's besides the point. I think the word you use, ironic, is a very accurate word. And I think that if the situation or the message coming from her doesn't make any sense, it's purely political. She's not incentivized to speak or seek answers or give any strong grounding to digital currencies or Bitcoin because her masters don't want it. It's coming from above her. And she is not an unwise, uneducated person. I would label her as smart and educated and probably intelligent. I would probably label that objectively. So for her to speak out against this, that only hurts her constituents. I mean, Chief, this Democratic Party, democracy, this is democratic money. That's one of the characteristics. It's democratic. Anyone can jump in, anyone can jump out. You can use it as you believe, so choose to. And there's very little things to stop you. It's pretty free and open. And boy, a lot of her constituents are working people, supposedly, right? The Democratic Party. And they need ways to send money either back to wherever the country the parents live in, or maybe to do business amongst each other at a small business level or a peer-to-peer level. You want to send some money to your next door neighbor. Cash isn't as prevalent as it was before. If you want to use some of these other means of sending value through some platform, there's a lot of fees. And her own constituents don't have the extra money to pay for fees and wait days for remittance across the country or to a different country. They don't have the extra money for I guess like overdraft fees or use at a retail. You go to the corner store to buy a loaf of bread and some milk. You get charged money on your credit card. Use your credit card to get out there, you're going to get hit with fees, and so is that retailer going to get hit with fees. So I don't see why she's not behind this. I struggle to find her angle on this, and it's disappointing. I'm disappointed. I'm not saying she's a bad person or anything like that. I'm not going after her personally. I just think that there's something more there. She still carries a lot of sway, upper levels of government, but I think that is she's going to lose this one. That's my opinion. She's going to lose this one, and it's going to hurt her more than help her to be that voice of the big banks and the big corporations.
Yeah, I agree. And that doesn't seem to play well with blue collar voters that historically the Democrat Party has been a lot of bread and butter, right? Pennsylvania unions in Massachusetts, right? Especially, Democrat, Irish Catholic voters in Massachusetts, like all of these things. And to see the party turn away from that so much, or certain folks, because it's not just Elizabeth Warren, it's a few others, but she's kind of the most outspoken. And I use this all the time and say, if you have a system that is based on if your people are in power or not, that is not a good system to have to rely on with something as important as money and value, right? Let's say that Trump gets into office, which almost seems more and more likely by the day with how things have been handled. If you want to send money to another country, let's say Trump and his cronies, I don't know what to call them, his some folks that, because Trump in my mind doesn't have a lot of policy or value positions. A lot of it is the team that he didn't, put into power. Let's say there's a certain country or certain immigrant population that Trump's going to do another Muslim ban 2.0 or something different, right? Well, let's say they ban remittance payments to these countries. Okay, you cannot send money to your family in Iran through this way or that way. Bitcoin and self custody, you can. Okay, so people need to get with the program and see the benefits of Bitcoin in an adversarial environment, regardless of if your adversary is the Democrats and Biden or if it's Republicans and Trump for whatever reason. Bitcoin is, as the book that we've talked a lot on the show about, Bitcoin is resistance money. Bitcoin is for you, and it should not rely on, the Democrats have been in power for a while. They've had our backs, or they don't go after us yet, or whatever. So we're fine, right? Well, that's not a very comforting system to be in. It doesn't have to be that way. That's the thing. Bitcoin is neutral for you, and it's resistance money. I really hope this can be a year that people will see that more. I hope people aren't forced to see it, but I'd like them to hypothetically understand the use case so that if that use case comes, they're ready and they're like, that's okay because we have Bitcoin or we have these privacy tools. That's why it's so important to talk about.
Unbelievable. That is a topic. Believe it or not, it is a topic. Besides firefighting, besides like union and local politics stuff, believe it or not, I am so taken aback by, but what you said very eloquently, I mean, not as eloquently as I have heard, but the same topic is being echoed at union meetings, at the tailboard talks, at the fire station. It's kind of like what you said there. And people are starting to get that understanding. They can't explain it the same way you just did, but they're starting to scratch the surface. And that's why I see that to circle back, the time is right. Like, these things are being talked about openly now on TV and on the internet and all these media outlets that we have. And the other word to use, ironic. I find it ironic that you can have two opposites, if you will, Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, Democratic on one side. There is that overlap, and we use these words like freedom. We use self-accountability, small businesses, entrepreneurs. They always try to help Main Street and not Wall Street. Well, jeepers, we're talking about Bitcoin here. And they will find that out. I'm highly confident that eventually that middle of that Venn diagram is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm highly confident is what you're saying. And yeah, and these things will become apparent. It's a changing country demographically. People, it's more of a global world. People are going to be looking for remittance, answers, peer to peer, parallel banking. We're going to be looking for those answers. Store of value. We're going to be looking for those things. Liquidity. These are all solved all in one protocol. Yeah, one digital asset. I'm very, very bullish about this year, next year, and the year after, and so forth. I think it's just going to get faster. I think the adoption is going to get faster. Time is right now, I think.
You're 100% right, and thank God for that. And Pat and I are going to keep talking. And as folks who listened to the pod recently know, we've been doing extended interviews and bonus content for folks. So if you want to hear the rest of our conversation, please check out our Substack link in the show notes. It's progressivebitcoiner.substack.com/subscribe. You can become a paid subscriber today. We're charging $6 a month to help us run the show, to keep things going forward and giving more extended interviews, bonus content. We've got swag to give to guests. So please subscribe if you want to hear the rest of this conversation. Pat, we're going to be talking about some of your interesting ideas around other adoption. I've heard you say some things about credit unions and things that these unions and others are working with. I want to talk to you a bit more about some of the conversations with firefighters and with the union and other conversations you've been having. So folks, please stay tuned to that. Subscribe if you haven't already and jump into that, and we'll see you for the rest of the conversation.